the devolved government and how the people are feeling so attached to government, and they are seeing that they need to come out and vote for a leader who's going to take care of these resources, who are going to take care of these functions that have been devolved and make sure that we get these services. In mature democracies where systems are already in place, systems are working, there's accountability, there's transparency, then you'll find that the media is the one that's going out, and a lot of campaigns are being done on TVs. We've seen an increase of that even this past election. We've heard on radios and televisions, all the candidates are doing their paid adverts, and that's reaching the people. And we're getting more and more into that mature democracy kind of state. But still, the people are so attached onto this election, onto government, they are going to turn out and vote for the people that they want. In a mature democracy, to do this early voter I mean, at the post office, at Huduma Center, people will go and just put in whatever. You know, it's just like, it's all part of service delivery. But with us, there's the manipulation of the voter because of just how much handouts you're giving and how you're relating with the people. And so you can see that correlation between the virtual and just how you...
A vote of no confidence.
Trevor, before you even ask that question, I'm amused at the expression of mature democracy. I don't know what a mature democracy is. Because, look. The fact that there are countries that have been holding elections longer than others doesn't make them mature. Look at the US and how they elected Trump. Look at France. Look at the EU. No. Let me explain myself. Even the EU and Britain, how Britain elected Boris and elected to get out of the EU. It does not express maturity.
Why?
If you may allow me to speak.
Let's finish. Okay.
Yes.
I agree with your choice.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. What I'm saying is, they regretted their choices as soon as they made those choices. That's the point I'm making, and therefore the question of maturity comes into question, and manipulation of the voter through Cambridge Analytica type of institutions. Coming back to Kenya anyway, that was banter. Coming back to Kenya, on the question of voter turnout and public participation, I had the privilege, unfortunately, it was not a complete privilege, of serving on the task force in the Kisii government's task force to inquire into the killing of elderly ladies on a suspicion or accusations of witchcraft. I went to a number of town hall meetings. Do you know, in each of those, people who attended expected to be paid or to be given food. So the question is, when you are participating in an activity that is supposed to benefit you, how do you then expect that you should be paid for it? Unless it is a private enterprise where you know you are a consultant who is going to be talking and getting paid for your work. So the question of funding to the IEBC in terms of public education, I know I've had my colleagues here discuss more about the funding for the processes, especially processing of the election. But the preparation for the election is not funded, and we have seen Parliament itself cut funds. And again, this is something contradictory, where you have politicians who have an interest in elections being the ones to approve budgets related to elections. They are the ones approving budgets related to the judiciary. But again, that is the nature of the democracy we are talking about. However, we need to have the public engage more closely with election preparedness from the first day, not campaigns, but election preparedness from the first day after an election, so that the things we learn from, mistakes we learn from today, we will be able to address them within the 5 years, excuse me, before we start preparing for the next election, because of the timelines that my colleagues are talking about. The timelines are related to the actual election, voting, tallying, announcement, and dispute resolution. But we need to find a way in which the rest is corrected. And the last point I want to make at this point is related to the amendment to the Elections Act, which brought about the unseemly coalitions that now seem to be the ones contesting the election, which in a sense explains why for the first time we have a lot of independent candidates winning. Now, these coalitions were forced marriages by the law, because the law was amended very close to the election. Member parties to the different coalitions did not have time to do their own primaries so that they can do a democratic election within themselves. They were not even asked, members of these individual political parties were not asked to make a choice which coalition they wished to join. So you find political party leaders, those you call party leaders or party chairmen, are the ones who decide. We are going to Azimio, we are going to Kenya Kwanza. So you find that the individual candidates and the members of the individual political party were unable to make a proper decision. And that is why either many of them from the same coalition lost, or chose to be independents, and those who were lucky, who were liked by their electors, elected them.
Cynthia, is that true? Let's pursue that line of thought for a bit. The unseemly coalitions that the advocate is talking about.
Absolutely. I see where, let me just give an example straight up from Busia County, because I'm straight off the field. In Teso South, we had a young lady who was a candidate on the Chap Chap party that I think the party leader is the former governor of Machakos.
Alfred Mutua.
Alfred Mutua, yeah. And so originally, when she was joining the party, she knew she was supporting the Raila Odinga presidency. And midstream, the party moved. So during the campaigns, she was really hard-pressed to say, I am Chap Chap of Azimio. There's a Chap Chap of Kenya Kwisha, but then there's a Chap Chap of Azimio, and I am Chap Chap of Azimio. And so that really puts the candidate in a place where the people feel you're speaking through, you're not... It's
both sides of the mouth.
Yeah, both sides of the mouth. It puts a question on your own credibility. Why didn't you move with your party leader? Because the party is governed by ideologies, and if you no longer subscribe to these ideologies, you should have moved with them. And so she feels like it was too late for me to move. And so many were caught between that rock and a hard place, whether to move with the party, maybe to stay as an independent, and so the place of coalitions, we find that, especially even in Western Kenya, where we had principles, political principles, Moses Wetangula and Mudavadi, who both are party leaders, being left out of this whole UDA thing. Because UDA went into the elections as UDA, UDA, and not as Kenya Kwisha. And so that... I'm straight off the field.
She's in campaign mode.
Forgive me, really.
Do better now.
Oh my gosh. Forgive me. Okay, yes. The coalition. And so that affected some of the candidates as well, because the people, during the campaign, they know that they're in this particular coalition, but when you get to the ballot, you're only seeing a political party, a political party. And so the people actually vote for this political party, which gives these other political parties a loss. And so,
but there are many people saying the rise of independent candidates is really because the primaries were bungled with allegations
primaries
of possible...
were bungled, there was a rise in political parties, but at the county level, not many came through as independents, as we had hoped to see. We wanted to see probably a 10, 20, 30% increase of independents coming in. I actually don't know. I've seen the colors, but I don't know how many independents are actually in the national parliament. I mean, we were expecting to see a huge increase because independents were a substantial amount of the candidates in this
in your
election,
assessment,
but they did not come through. Yeah.
People still vote along party lines. And
people are still voting along party lines because the main two protagonists were these two coalitions, Azimio and Kenya.
There are people like my friend Okeya Mutata, who is now your senator-elect, who is in a party that is largely unknown.
Yeah.
So one would consider that to be, I would treat him as an independent because that party was not known by the voters. But
Okeya himself is a brand, and so he did not have that task of
the one thing that I am very happy about is the formation of the National Assembly of Parliament.
Yeah.
The fact that it seems to be half-half now is a very good thing for the country, because the tyranny of Jubilee Parliament, in terms of its a vast majority in the previous Parliament, was a disservice to the country. If you may recall, they passed a lot of laws, and many of which were nullified by the courts because they were bad laws. Because a decision was taken, they voted just because they had the tyranny of numbers in Parliament. But now, seeing that we have almost equality of arms in terms of numbers, I am pretty happy about this outcome, even if it is an outcome that is nearly illegitimate on account of what I have said about the amendments they made to the Political Parties Act.
Danvers, what do you attribute the rise of the independent candidates to, in your view?
Just, sorry, if you don't mind, let me just pivot back to what you said, then I'll answer your question. As far as where I come from a coalition perspective, okay, I know there are issues with the Coalition Act, and I know we have issues with that. But as far as coalition is concerned, you see what you just said, the last point right now. When I look at this, actually in today's paper, for example, if you look at today's paper, as far as coalition is concerned, I am actually happy. Because rather than we have 89 parties in this country. Can you imagine? And most of them are, 89 political parties in this country. Okay? Now, and most of them, 90% of them, actually 95% of them are just local, regional parties along ethnic lines to an extent. And they fragment our society and our country rather than unite them. The silver lining for coalitions is they unite our country. These coalitions cut across. Kenya Kwanza has strongholds across, whether it's from this side to this side to this side. They have members across the country. Azimio, the same thing. So for me, it brings the country together. So the less parties that we have, the better. Now, independence, to answer your question, you see, when you have coalitions, of course, will force independence. If you look at countries where, like Israel, for example, or Germany, for example, where they have, Germany, I think, has 7 major parties, the Green Social Democrats, FD, the Israel Labour, and Likud. You see, coalitions, unlike where we have, to answer your question on independence, coalitions are based on ideology, okay? You understand? So if you're left-leaning, all the left parties are on one side. If you're right-leaning, all the right-leaning parties on one side, okay? And then you have the moderates who, will now, they're neither left nor right. Based on that ideology, that's usually the worst. Now, in our country, we don't have, coalitions are not ideology-based. They are special purpose vehicles. Actually, I predict most of these parties within these coalitions, within a year or two, they'll start fragmenting. Because they are there for this election, not because they genuinely believe on a specific platform. This is what we stand for as a coalition. If you really ask them what they stand for, They just wanted to win the election. That's about it. So, you understand? So once they win or lose, that's the end about of this election. But for me, it's a good thing. Now, independence to me will play a critical role in terms of what he has said, because they can be the swing. Because if you look at the nation today, the blue and the yellow are almost thereabout. So if you really want to move a motion in Parliament, either in Senate, especially National Assembly, you need the independence. But also we know where most of them lean to or lean on. So we can pretty much predict. But at least the checks and balances is very good for our democracy and governance.
Yeah, because the switch from the independence is because the party's primaries didn't go according to their plan, so they're not entirely independent.
Yes, so they're not really independent. Yeah, they still belong to a certain section.
Even on the campaign trail, you could hear some of these independent candidates saying, for them to win, they would say, I'm an independent but affiliated to me, or affiliated, like I'm supporting so-and-so, but I'm an independent candidate. But an interesting point there you've raised, and it concerns me what we are looking at in terms of transition, because I'm yet to see a political marriage that lasts in this country, like to 5 or even 10-year term. Azimio, for instance, has brought together, is it over 20 political parties?
23, yeah.
I mean, what are we looking at? Because Harun is optimistic about, Parliament being split almost into half, saying it's a good thing if he, in his own assessment. But how are we likely to benefit from that, coming from a history of political marriages that don't last? As soon as they get to Parliament, will this hold, Cynthia?
Actually, political parties themselves, as individual political party, as individual institutions, the one that has lasted longest is possibly KANU, and the next would be ODM.
So are we likely to benefit from this arrangement anyway?
This arrangement...
Political interests, because politics is about interests, and it depends on what's in it for me. Because I know, coming into, sorry to cut you short, but just to input a little bit, we had the Coalition for Restoration and Democracy in 2013 that held together until it welcomed and incorporated another principle coming into the 2017, and they became the National Super Alliance, and they held together until they felt like they could no longer stick together, because it was all about interests. It's like going into this election, what's in it for me? And it's like basically sharing out the cake. If once we get into government, this is how we're going to govern, and we will govern in this way. And so everything is all laid out. And we've seen that even with the UDA party. The principals from various political parties, when they came in to support the UDA candidate, they were promised a certain number of cabinet positions, certain numbers of PSS, basically sharing out the government structure and saying that this is what's in it for you if you bring me the vote. And so for that to hold together, you need to win this election. And that's why it's right now all focus is on Bomas. Who's going to get this thing? Because we need to manage our various wives in this whole marriage, wives or husbands.
Actually, the question of interest, I think I would have qualified it to personal interest of the politicians, because so far as I see things, there are no political parties that are pursuing a national public interest. The only organ that does a public interest is possibly civil society, that does genuine public interest issues. But the political parties pursue the interests of their leaders and their ethnic groups, because under their leadership is based on support from their ethnic communities. So if we had politicians like we had at the time of fighting for independence, who wished well for the country, then we would be saying they are focused on a public interest. But now we have politicians who are thinking about themselves. So when you hear the political leadership of Kenya Kwanza, they are insisting they want to be president and lead the country. They are not saying we want to lead the country so that we make ABC for the country. The leadership of Azimio doesn't say this is what we want to do for the country, except the difference is that the Azimio leadership has previously shown that they have fought for public interest, and that is the only affection they may have with those who support public interest. Otherwise, our political parties are vehicles for individuals to get to leadership, and that's why when they join coalitions, they are pursuing that personal interest, as she's saying. And once the personal interest is either achieved or not achieved, the next thing is we're going to renegotiate. I wouldn't be surprised that even these independents who are being elected will be voting alongside the sides of the political coalitions they wish to support in terms of the leadership of that political coalition. Or even these political, whoever wins, will be buying the independents or buying MPs from the other side, because we have seen them being bought all along. And that is the issue that leads me to the question of corruption in Parliament. We have seen our Parliament being accused of being bought to vote one way or another, depending on what the leadership of either a particular bill or a particular interest want. Accusations have been made. I'm sure you remember people being, members of Parliament accusing each other of being corrupted with either 10,000 or 50,000 shillings in the bathrooms of Parliament, and or being met by certain leaderships, leaderships of parties prior or the night before the voting on a particular bill. So, whereas I'm optimistic about the balance, I am also cautious and plentifully cautious about the levels of corruption in this country and how they might be bought one way or another in terms of voting within Parliament.
But they hold together for us. And if we take, for example, in 2002, when we had the National Rainbow Coalition, it held together until we were coming into the next election in 2007. And so it holds together because when they all come together, they're actually going in to implement a certain manifesto. And we saw in 2002 the introduction of the CDF and just how well it was working, until we start coming into the next election where the politicians' interests now say, like, I want to steer this ship. And you have various politicians within that coalition now wanting to be the head of the ship. And so that's what begins to make that fall apart.
Danvas, I wanted to look at this in terms of comparing the heavy manifestos that these political coalitions gave Kenyans before the Kenyans went to the ballot, vis-a-vis their likelihood of holding together, like what Cynthia is saying. What are we likely to lose or gain if you compare?
You see, back to what I said, you see, a manifesto is like a house, okay? The challenge we have with all manifestos from both sides is the foundation which they stand on, okay? Which I say that is the ideology. What's your conviction? What's your worldview? Because that determines your manifesto. It should rather ideally determines. For example, let me give you examples to answer your question. You see, using an American example, excuse me, if I'm a conservative or Republican, they believe in small governance, less taxes. So you know, for example, that if a Republican comes, he's going to say, hey, less taxes, okay, small government. Okay, if a Democrat's going to come, they're like, well, we need more social programs. So you already know where they're coming from. The challenge we have with the manifestos, they're not really rooted and grounded on a firm or a specific ideology. You understand? They are expedient, is what people really want to hear. And if you quite frankly look at and examine them in a nutshell, what are they saying? They're pretty much closely saying the same thing. There's not really much difference in terms of ideology. All promising all these things they will do. Well, the challenge you have with that, if you understand even the budget cycle, is the fact that whoever comes to power now is bound by the budget that's already passed by the previous government. So there's not much you can do in terms of your manifesto. Your 100 days promises ain't going to work simply because the budget's already set and it's actually rolling. You will do your budget next year, in July.
Supplementary budget.
Yeah, and maybe supplementary budget. Yeah, you can do S1, S2, S3. But even that, if you look at supplementary budget, there's still an extent regional budget. You don't really deviate much from that. So there's not so much you can do. Even supplementary, the first S1 will come maybe November earliest, given how the House is divided. It's going to be probably January before you do the S1 you call S1 in budgeting. So 100 days will be passed before you do anything to begin with, because you're bound by law. There's nothing you can do but abide by what has been approved by Parliament, appropriated by Parliament.
But they knew this as they were making those promises.
100-day man.
Well,
You know,
so
within
that's
100
trying to answer your question, because there's governance. You see, politics is what they say. Politics about pros. I mean, governance is a different animal altogether. The reality in governance, if you've been there, I am there, is radically different. So what I'm hearing both of them say, I'm like, guys, do you know the reality of governance? So people will be disappointed. Reality. Which now leads to what I'm saying earlier. Eventually, the challenging of holding those manifestos and promises would materialize, because now, especially now that the fact that this House is pretty much divided, when it comes to appropriation, whichever person becomes to be the president of a country, they have a divided House, okay? Chances of you pushing all your agendas in this House are pretty much slim, because the other guys will be like, no. It will be very, very slim, unless you're very good in your PR skills and managing people. So for me, you look at the next cycle, it will be a challenge to pull your election, because the first year, you rarely do most things you promise because budget has been set. Now, the second year is when you start. Now, the House is divided. Now, if these coalitions hold the way they are, it will be hard for you to get everything. You may get half of what you promised. Now, come in the next election cycle, what will you say? Well, I promised this. Well, I didn't deliver because of X, Y, and Z, but you promised. So now, back to what he said, the reality is seen in the next election cycle, whereby because you didn't deliver, people with disenfranchised, as Trevor, as you said earlier, voters are not really happy. And the turnover, of course, we've seen is almost 80% previous House. I mean, it's the highest turnover actually we've seen. A lot of people have been swept out because of the same thing. So I would say this, and to the politicians, to Kenyans, let's be realistic to an extent, okay? Let's be realistic to an extent. Let's be very realistic to Kenyans. Let's promise actually what can be delivered. I like a politician who can say, I'll do 2 things, and that's about it, rather than 50 things, because the manifestos are like 50 things, which majority of them are going to, I'll do only 2 things, and that's it. If I don't do, I can go home.
Yeah, but Cynthia, the thing is, you've been in the trenches as a politician. The key is to sell hope. If you are that honest to the electorate, would they even listen to you?
Absolutely. One of the things that Council pointed out was that we are looking at the characters and the people who are selling hope and all the marketers within that coalition. I'll call them, of course, they're the politicians, but they're the marketers. They're basically marketing that manifesto. One of the things he pointed out is what is the character of these people? We looked at one coalition, the Azmir coalition, has characters who have always had the public at heart and have been basically human rights defenders, advocates, and who we know they do what they say and they mean what they do. When they were given responsibilities in previous regimes and governments, we saw their actions and inactions. And therefore, we know that when they say they're going to do that, they're standing on these ideologies from their parties, that they are social democrats, that they are going to be looking at all these social welfare things that they have put in their manifesto. A lot of the things in the manifesto is going directly to service these people. We have seen, for example, let me give this example. When His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga was the Minister for Roads, we saw what he was able to do. I mean, he didn't, of course, with public participation, but if he needed to pass the road through some suburb that had all these plush houses, we saw these houses coming down because the road had to be done. And this is the radical surgery that Kenya needs. And we know that the people who are speaking, they're not speaking from both sides of their mouth, that these people, once they have said this, they're going to do it. Whereas in another coalition, you're looking at the character of the person. Why aren't they talking, why aren't they crusading against what is really ailing Kenya? Because a lot of the things that people have said, especially when there was a previous process in the whole country airing their views, which was the Building Bridges initiatives. I hate to bring it up now, but okay, not hate, but I had to bring it up because that's where really Kenyans... And corruption was a major issue. And when you see one of the people, one side of the coalition not bringing this up, not speaking to it, not saying how they're going to handle it, then you'll be a little bit skeptical about how they're going to deliver. And therefore, that's where now the 100 days delivery will be a challenge for them, because what you say and what you do are two different things. Okay. And so you're able to see that.
We'll get into the Chapter 6 leadership and integrity part, but let's hear what Harun Ndubi has to say about these issues of promises being made by politicians and the expectations of the electorate in terms of the manifesto.
Actually, I keep wondering what, or even why they make the promises. Because the biggest promise Kenya has, and that is the basis of the hope of the country, is the Constitution. If you upheld the Constitution and enacted laws that followed the Constitution and did everything in accordance with the law, that will help us deliver. Because what we need in terms of the selling of that hope idea, what we need really is an environment where human dignity, equality, and the equality of opportunity is available to everyone. Once that is done, people will be able to invest in themselves and do and achieve their dreams. But when a politician promises that we are going to give you money, what is that? What they have not said anything much about infrastructure or in health. Okay, Azimio's leader said there will be something called Babacare. He has not unpacked it. I have not understood what it means in terms of the reality of it. But saying, I will give you cash. The Kenya Kwanza leader has said, I'm going to give you this many billions. On what basis? And I like what he says. The budget is already done. So where are you going to get these billions from? You are going to tax people. And it's not saying this is how I will tax the richer and probably tax less the poorer, so that there is some level of equity in terms of taxation, so that those who are poor can make savings and improve their lives. Those who are too rich can sacrifice something so that the poorer will benefit. So the political promises are basically trash. If you asked me,
I wouldn't trash them.
Let him finish.
Forgive my language.
Let him finish.
I listen patiently when you're speaking, so perhaps learn to be that patient with me. The only promise that I would trust that can happen is a promise based on how people will respect the law, how we can stop extrajudicial killings, how we will improve the welfare of our security infrastructure and all that. But other things about giving people money and putting money into people's pockets, that is a lie. That's what I'm calling trash. Because there is no government that is going to bring money and give it to you for free.
Yeah. Harun, you've raised very fundamental issues there, but I'm just wondering, Danvas, to what extent is the electorate empowered to interrogate these manifestos to that extent and to ask those further questions beyond just what is being presented?
And the question, if they have read the manifestos, yes. I've never seen one myself.
Yeah.
Are the cash transfers to the elderly that are being implemented right now all trash? And how is it being paid back? You know, if it's being done at a minimum to the elderly, to a certain scale in the population, if it is now escalated to the vulnerable families, how would you trash that? If I came in and said there'll be no... I remember being in the county assemblies that the devolution ministry said no more benchmarking abroad. And those are savings. If then the leader comes in and says no more excesses of government in certain areas, it doesn't necessarily have to be in taxation, but just looking at how we can make savings in other operations within government so that this money that has been saved is actually put to finance this program that we have, I think it is doable.
So there's value in some...
Yes, it's being done at a minimal. It can be escalated.
Yeah. But who's asking the how, the pertinent questions about how sustainable and how practical this is? I believe that is what Harun is raising. Because yes, these promises come, they're big and they're enticing. And sometimes they can generate that much needed energy from the electorate. But who is asking how it's going to be implemented? Ali, we're just talking about the magic of 100 days, and Danvers is breaking down how it's impractical as we speak. Who is going deeper?
You see, first of all, to your first question about the people being empowered, quite frankly, for the most part, the Kenyan population, I now that the Premier League is on, I don't watch it myself, but the people who really love it, Kenyans and politicians like the Premier League, they are so emotionally vested in these politicians on both sides. I mean, they're emotionally vested. Now, if you had to ask one of the players in the Premier League whether they know any Kenyan by name, apart from the president, they don't know, and probably they don't care. You understand? But Kenya is so vested emotionally. But how does a team winning or losing affect your life? Not really much, unless you did bet or put money into it. And that's a challenge we have with the Kenyan population in terms of politics. It's an emotional investment. Okay, it's not intellectual. Because if it's intellectual, then you'll ask the hard questions. The how? If you really ask about it. It's emotional. I love this guy. Okay? Why? I just like him. That's what, so there's really no good reason. Or previously, because I belonged to a specific ethnic group, therefore because my leader is in that side, therefore I will support him. Whether that person is good for you or not is immaterial. You will just support him. That's a challenge we have. Now, for me, what you're doing here, because Kenyans are listening, is what we need. We are moving the needle and moving the conversation to really ask. Kenyans need to ask the hard questions. Not civil society. That's not the work of civil society. Because civil society do not vote for politicians. The Kenyans who vote for. Because unfortunately, civil society has now come to the issue of accountability. Trevor and I have been to CMD. That's why we really, grill these guys. That's not the work of civil society. It should be the work of the voters. Rather than go to rallies, it should be the other way. Not that politicians speak. Rallies should be the other way around, where voters ask hard questions as to exactly what is asking, the how, nitty-gritty, because then it will be a sober-up expectation. I think to your last bit, here is the reality we face, and I feel for our country. There's a certain reality. There's an economic reality. If you look at the fiscal policy that is already in place, and the monetary policy that is already in place, they construe the next administration pretty much. The only thing they can adjust is the fiscal policy, because that's where governance comes. The monetary policy is set by the central bank. You know what really you can do. Our ceiling is facing headwinds. Inflation is high. Kenyans are facing reality of high inflation, for example. Now, it is not about to go anytime soon, okay? And that's the reality that now when it comes to governance, Kenyans need to face. And I generally feel for whoever comes to power, because they will really have a hard time stealing this ship we call Kenya, that we love very much. Because we are facing headwinds, we're facing challenges, and at the end of the day, whichever side that you can say that you're supporting, they will have that reality. We need to, as a country, still move forward on terms of these issues that we are discussing. In the next 5 years will be determinant of even how we move as a country forward, because for the first time we really have a balanced house. If you are, to me, I don't call it a divided house. I call it a balanced house. I'm more pragmatic in my approach. It's a balancing act. If you're in governance, one of the most important things Trevor you can have and soften is counter checks. Okay, Wakili just said right now, just said implementation of law is so critical. If we operationalize the institution, our constitution rather, will be so far as a country. So for me, the checks and balances are so critical in governance, because when you have a runaway side of government, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the executive, then we have problems that we have. So for me, I look forward that the next 5 years will be to me are very critical for our country. Not, right now we're looking at the presidency and the election. For me, I look at the governance aspect of it, and now we go as a country. If they can steal the ship, it can bring sound fiscal policy to stabilize our country, then we have a chance now to move forward and to take off. Because this country has a potential, guys. I think we have the potential to be one of the greatest countries in Africa. And this is the time about where to say it. The greatest resource we have in our country is not gold, is not oil, is the people of Kenya. We are the greatest resource. Compared to anywhere in Africa, we're the smartest people, I believe, and we can go further if we harness that potential that we have.
And what Danvas is raising, Harun, brings me to my next conversation. Appointments after polls, because he says we have the greatest potential here. But we've seen this several times whereby the political losers are the ones given plum positions as a political reward for having championed the agenda of the ruling coalition at that point. Should that be done away with, so that it is clear that if the electorate rejected you, then there's no way you should be given an appointment which is essentially going to serve the same electorate that rejected you to begin with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would take it further a little, but let me say this about the politicians who have lost elections. Already, we have seen politicians promise others political jobs. Of course, we know that every political leadership has to have people it trusts in certain essential or in political support areas. But in terms of technical people, technicians, that should be left to the Public Service Commission to appoint the most competent persons. However, there is another element about those appointments that is quite disappointing in this country. If you look at the appointment of people to the judiciary, for instance, you will find that you are told, not just the judiciary, but other places, including commissions, where you are asked to get a certificate of good conduct from the police, get a certificate of clearance certificate from KRA, get a certificate from the HELB, and such others. Now, the question, and CRBs, if you have been listed, and ESCC as well, that is an exclusionary condition that is given perhaps to people who are competent but may be owing debts. And the debts are debts. They are payable, and you cannot be denied a job, or you shouldn't be denied a job because you have a debt. Two, if you have tried to do anything in this country, or anywhere else in the world, there is a possibility that you have made a mistake. If you do nothing, you will have a very clean bill of health, and then you get a job for which you are not competent. But I'm saying that regarding technical jobs. But for political appointments, I think every leader is entitled to have people they trust. If you have people you don't trust or you distrust and you expect them to work with you to achieve your vision, if you have any, and I don't know whether we have leaders politicians who have visions other than what she called interest, which I'm calling personal interest. I'm not sure whether they are there, but assuming they have a vision, or even based on those promises they make, even if they are false promises, or those that they can achieve, even if there are too many, but they can only achieve just a few, then you would expect that they should have people they may trust. However, the Constitution laid out clearly that cabinet secretaries should not be politicians or should not be members of parliament. But we have seen in the previous regime, the outgoing regime did at some point, I think in the second term, they appointed losing politicians into cabinet. And the question therefore was, are we descending, coming down, lowering the expectations or the high standards the Constitution set? And I would say the answer to that question is yes, because that's what even the promoters of the failed BBI were doing. because they themselves said, we now want some members of cabinet to come from parliament so that they can account to the people. I don't know what logic they are using about that, about accountability to the people, because you account to the people by doing what is lawful in accordance with the law. There is nothing else you need to do to account. You account to the people also by giving reports to Parliament and promoting public participation so that people can get to know. And like my colleague here is saying, let the people be the ones to asking you questions rather than you talking at them. But unfortunately, what we see in our politics is politicians seeking to talk at us. And they say, if we have appointed Harun Dubi from your constituency, therefore your interests are taken care of. And that's why I feel fairly sad when you find people saying, oh, because our man from Kitui is going to be the prime minister is good, or our son from Nyamira is the cabinet secretary for interior, so we are taken care of. And yet when Matiang'i or Charity Ngilu or whoever else earns their salary, they don't distribute it to you. In fact, talking about salaries now, that reminds me again about Parliament and its arrogation of the power to itself to improve their own salaries and change the law about their own salaries and benefits and emoluments, which is itself a reverse of the question of accountability and holding public interest. And if you ask any of those individuals, they will tell you, oh, you know, when you people die, you all come to us. I mean, the relatives come to us for fundraisings. When you are sick, we do. But when you are sick, it's your insurance which will take care of it. Those who don't have insurance in the village, it is us villagers, like our sister here, who will come to contribute. The MPs and others will not come. So that's why I think that we need to have politicians who are focusing on the greater public good rather than saying we are going to improve our salaries so that we can take care of our interests.
Yeah, Cynthia, should this culture then be broken? Because some of these appointments are even done before the election. We've seen, even during the campaigns, they would line up the CS and say, this is proposed for this ministry, this is proposed. Is it even fair?
We need to appreciate that the school of politicians that we are, the crop, not the school, the crop of politicians that we have, all went through the professor of politics, the late President Moi, where we saw regions that did not favor him. He actually brought up an individual who would represent that region. And basically, that's what we are seeing now. First and foremost, let me begin by commending the leaders who come from Central region or the Mount Kenya region who have been aligned to Azimio. Because the purpose of leadership, as Trevor alluded, is to sell hope and to give people direction. And basically, what the Central region or Mount Kenya region, their fears of not being Azimionated, Azimio aligned, was because of an argument that had been sold to them for the longest time, that the leadership on the other side is led by a madman, a man who believes in witchcraft, and all these are allegations that have been in the psyche of the people who have been raised with this psyche, who have this fear. And therefore, it was the leadership who now had the responsibility of going back and demystifying that, saying all this was campaign. How then would you call a person mad if this is a person who has taken it on himself to deny himself so that at whatever cost, he sees that changes are made. We made changes to the Constitution. We're able to bring in the Constitution. And the beneficiaries of that same Constitution that we passed in 2010 are the people now who begin to rule. And they rule and say, let's do this. 10 years you will rule, and the next 10 years we will rule. So the foundation of one side is 10 for me, 10 for you. And the foundation of the other side is let's bring the entire country together. So you find that one coalition does not have patronage in an area like in the Mount Kenya region. Like, for example, Azimio. Most of the people who ran on an Azimio ticket or Jubilee, for example, in Mount Kenya, have all lost their seats. what is Azmir supposed to do with Mount Kenya? Because now they believe in one Kenya. Do you leave out this whole region? Because we will only now work with the people who have been elected. The remedy is to appoint political appointments from these regions, people who were there, who fought for you, who stood by you, and they were selling this ideology. And what was the ideology? They are social democrats.
So is that for the people or for the selfish interest?
It is for the people, because these people are tried and tested. Because just like in a family, I can only bring this example to a family level. The more empowered or educated the family is, and the family members and everybody is employed in this family, the easier the family will live. I mean, if you have both a husband and wife working, they're able to take care of the family needs. And in that example, so too in a community, it does transcend. And he's given the example, us local leaders are the ones who go for the Harambee. So too do the politicians. We saw when Jubilee, I just can't move from this example, Jubilee took on the reins of power, and one principal actually now made appointments for the entire country, and the deputy president actually made appointments from his region, basically from Rift Valley. These people, if I'm appointed a permanent secretary or a director in a parastatal, it's just not for me. Yes, it is for me, but I am called into these Harambes. I do have other employment opportunities that I'm going to bring in people from my country. And so it's coming from Kenya's history and learning from the professor of politics. This is the way things were done. Of course, the Constitution has cured this by giving us devolution, and that resources have been devolved down to the country. And we don't all have to go and line up at State House and grovel at the feet of the president to get a road or to get electricity or to get water. But the Constitution has answered this. But still, in the political sphere, that appointment actually affects that region, because you will be beneficiaries in ways that you probably do not know.
But Cynthia, if the people wanted that person to represent their interests, they would have
voted for that person.
Yeah, they would have elected that person. But Danvas, your thoughts on this also?
I thought the official campaign period is over.
Am I campaigning?
IBC will sanction us. This campaigning is still going on here.
We're in the season until they announce.
We are borrowing lessons. Yeah?
So, but that's just it. But I think for me, see, there's a reality. I like being very real with the kind of issues. When you get there, you have to balance a lot of interest. I get your point, question, Trevor, and to answer Safin's, respond to Safin, let's be real here. You have to balance a lot of interest, okay, and expectations too. There are people who are on your side, who are your key allies, who've lost an election, okay, for one reason or the other. They have lost an election, either the primaries or the final election. These are people who also, because they supported you, brought a number of votes to you, or are influential one way or another. Okay, so as much as they lost, but they still were significant to your campaign, whichever house or movement it is. And the promises that actually are made also. There are people who, to balance the equation during the primaries, for example, people are told, okay, you step down, you give this, but you get something. Okay, those promises still have to be kept to an extent. So it's a reality of governance and politics, for that matter, that these positions will have to go to certain people. Now, whether they're lost or not, that's another question. For me, what I would advocate is whatever positions go to whoever they get is they're qualified people. So to me, I don't look at whether they lost an election or not. The question is, are they right, are they fit for the job? Because we have to think about the country first. Okay, so patronage is there. But, you know, we have political appointments, positional political appointments, but you can appoint somebody who's right for that political appointment, who actually fits that role, the political appointment, who's qualified to do that job, who's competent to do that job, not just for the sake of reward, but for the sake of the country. So for me, what I can advocate for the government that is coming, think the country first. So even as you reward and as you fill those board positions and this and that and other positions and key positions in government, put the country first. Give people who have a track record. Give people who actually can deliver. And still balance your political side, because it's a reality that they have to. They don't have much choice, because then if you don't, then you got problems later. So to me, interest, yes, political interest, but for the country, put people that actually can govern, can actually deliver results for the country. Now, if you do that, the governance or the administration that are in place have a high chance of winning back, because now you have key people who deliver, especially on the technical side, the technocrats, the bureaucrats. If you get the right people, let me tell you, we saw with Kibaki, I mean, you can transform our country. You can lay foundations for a country that will transform our country. Yeah.
All right.
I hear what he's saying,
yeah,
but that is how corruption works. Because you get people to certain area appointments, call them cabinet secretaries, because you trust them and they're your friends and they're your supporters. When they engage in corruption within the ministries, you are unable to sanction them, because that's why we have seen not many ministers, except those who have fallen out of favor, have been charged in court. Those others who have continued to promote corruption but are in favor of the political establishment hardly get sanctioned at all.
Okay, we'll come back and talk about the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, Leadership and Integrity. But for now, let's take a quick break here on Kenya's Choice 2022. We're keeping a pulse on what's happening at the Bomas of Kenya. We'll cross over there to Francis Gashuri to give you an update. IBC has until tomorrow. They're cutting it very close. There are indications that there might be an announcement today, but it's not been confirmed by them, because the latest they can do it anyway is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. So far, the forms they've received online, Form 34B stand at 286 out of 291. In terms of Form 34As, they've received 46,201 out of 46,229.
Yes, we'll find out from Gashuri whether all the returning officers are there and how many they've tallied and confirmed so far right after this break. And Mwana will also be joining us in a bit.
South Africa concentrate is my mom's choice. 1, it is 4 times more concentrated. 2, it's ready to use, no need to dilute. 3, it's packed with 4 times more fragrance. And it smells so good. 4, 1 bottle gives you 40 washes. That's 4 times more washes. New South Africa concentrate is 4 times more concentrated. For 4 times more washes and for 4 times more fragrance.
Nyosha shilingi zaidi na zaidi. Sasa unapata ofa juu ya ofa ya kuwa 100% data bonus leo. Alafu piga star 544 hash au tembelea My Safaricom app kununua bundle na kupata target yako. Safaricom is for you.
Hamjambo wa Kenya, jina langu ni Vanessa Gwandaru. Ukitaka wimbo huu kama sikiza tune yako, bonyeza star 811 star 344 hash. Kumbuka, sikiza na Citizen ni nyumbani kwa wasanii wote.
right, thank you for staying with Kenya's Choice 2022. This is a world-to-world coverage right here on Citizen TV. Na kwa sasa Mwanahamisi Hamadi anaungana nasi katika mchakato wa mawasiliano. Siko vibaya sana Mwanahamisi. Najaribu,